I'm sure that someone will look at this video and roll their eyes going, here we go again, monks blazing a Black Oath joint. To that I'll say, I'll stop when he makes the bad game, so deal with it. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mildra, and I will be your gaming monk for the evening. So, the terror of space. Patent pending. That extreme form of isolation that makes science fiction such a natural partner with horror. After all, it's the concept of the fear of the unknown, the most primal form of fear, taken to its biggest extreme with the vastness of space. A lot of that can be tied into some ways that works like 2001 or Alien have pioneered it. Even though the former isn't a horror movie, although I'd say a rogue AI in space is the stuff of nightmares, which we would learn years later with System Shock, but I digress. This week's review is tapping into that primal fear, along with exploring the unknown frontier, and the distant coldness of an employer that sees its workers as items on a spreadsheet. This week, we're talking about Across 1,000 Dead Worlds. Created by Alex T. of Black Oath Entertainment, and I will be referring to as Across because, once again, I am not paid by the syllable. This is a hard SF experience, well, hard-ish, that leans into those primal fears. Focused on contracted explorers that are looking for something even their employers don't quite understand, even if they do reverse engineer it. I will note in the interest of disclosure that I have done plenty of interviews with Alex T, and I did one on this game as well as back the initial Kickstarter run. That will, of course, not play a factor into my assessment. With that said, how does it hold up? Let's find out. Across runs at 446 pages, and while that can appear daunting, a lot of this is in a one-column format, so it's nowhere near as big as the page count makes it out to be. Much like other Black Oath games that I've covered, either in interviews or reviews, there's a solid use of hyperlinks and bookmarks, but no index. Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, I suppose. It just means that this is easier digitally than physically. For some of you, that's not going to be a problem, but it is worth noting, since there are some people who prefer physical and some who prefer digital, and some, like me, who don't care as long as you're playing. Character creation is presented right out of the gate as a field manual for your deep diver, those contracted to explore deep space, and we'll dive into that with Aldine once again. Now, the first step is your primary attributes, which are akin to the basic 6 scores in more litigious role-playing games. Each of these start at 8, and you may distribute 12 points between them, with a cap at 18. So in our case, we'll go with Strength 10, Dexterity 10, Constitution 12, Willpower 10, Intelligence 8, and Charisma 8. You also have 4 secondary attributes, each having a set starting amount. First is Luck, which starts at 3 and can be spent to either reroll checks, or to avoid a lethal wound by spending all of the luck that you have. Next is Stamina, which starts at 10 and essentially acts as your action points, with different actions having different stamina costs. Lastly, Stress and Wounds are how much mental and physical strain you can take, stress starting at 0 and wounds at 3. The third step is Skills, which works similarly to attributes. In this case, you have 70 points in skills, all the skills start at 0, and you may distribute them among the 12 different skills available, with no skill getting above 10. In our case, we'll go with a 5 in Arsad Tech, Medical Aid, Resolve, Science, Survival, and Technology, and 10 in Close Combat, Perception, Range Combat, and Stealth. Now, fourth is Talents, additional features that you can pick up. Every time you gain a level, you gain a new talent. You can only have up to 5 talents, and if you gain a new one after having 5, it must replace an existing talent. These can be picked from the list available or determined randomly with a D100 roll. Now in our case, we'll go with Point Blank Expert, meaning we can fire in melee without getting penalized. Next is Background, which grants a point in one of 2 potential skills. Of the available backgrounds, we'll go with Warlord and take a +1 in Manipulation. There are other random tables after this about where you come from and your personality traits and so on, but those aren't important for the crunch side of things. I do appreciate them, though. Now lastly, we have 2,000 Drake coins, the main currency, to spend on our starting equipment. We'll spend that on a combat knife, a Malco 347 shotgun, KSA body armor, giving it an armor of 3, a vac suit, 5 units of ammunition, magnetic boots, and emergency suit sealant. Character creation is straightforward, with the only tricking parts being your starting equipment. I think a package system might help folks who have analysis paralysis on that, much like recommended talents for different roles, which is in this section. Now, keep in mind, there's no classes in the game, but there are archetypes that can be leaned into. That said, there is an equipment list in the random NPC generation part later in the book, so that could be repurposed. Other than that, it's pretty to the point. A cross uses a d20 as its primary resolution. In most cases, you roll a d20, add the relevant attribute and skill, and you're looking to see whether or not you get above 20. If you get above 20, you succeed. If not, you fail. Now, combat is performed on a hex grid, with a lot of charts for randomly setting up character and NPC placement, as well as things like cover and other elements of this grid. This, of course, assumes that you're using the blank grid provided, which is on their website and on ttrpg, and not your own hex grid. But I do appreciate the presence here, since that's an issue not often addressed for people who need encounters on the fly. As mentioned, stamina is your action point system, and each action costs a certain amount of stamina. However, movement does not count for this, as all participants may move only 1 hex per round, or 2 at the cost of all their stamina. Fortunately, stamina resets to 10 each round, so turtling isn't really necessary. There are ways to do it, but it's not one where you need to play that level of defensive if need be. In addition, there's no static defense target. Both the attacker and the target make checks. Close combat is a contested wall with the higher one inflicting damage, meaning you could do a melee attack and end up being the one taking damage if you roll poorly. Ranged combat is defended against with a dexterity check. Regardless, weapons inflict d10 damage plus the modifier from their weapon, which is always a die type, and can be modified based on the hit location. If the total damage inflicted equals to or exceeds the target's constitution, the target is knocked down. Subsequent attacks that beat constitution inflict 1 wound. When you're out of wounds, you're dead. Now, dodges and parries are a way to counteract this, but it's not a reactive action, so much as it is spending stamina to inflict a -1 penalty on the attack at a 1-to-1 basis. Armor can also block damage. Its armor rating will note how many points of damage it can block, so how many wounds you don't get. Of course, once that runs out, you can destroy a piece of armor to negate a potential wound. Lastly, a natural 20 is still a critical hit, but instead of increased damage, it just means you automatically knock down or wound the target. Even if they have armor, you go right through that. Now, I know I said combat is hex-based, but there's an alternative zone-based system for those who want a simpler approach. This divides combat into 4 linear zones. Think of the party at Zone 1, the opposition at Zone 4, and 2 neutral zones in between. All in all, combat is a straightforward affair with a lot of modular options to make it a particularly curated experience. That is to say, you can make it more crunchy or keep it simple as you so choose. Now, outside of combat, Across is very mission-based in its design, especially with how it handles encounters and expeditions. The diving into worlds in and of itself has its own mechanics, since you never know how long a dive is actually going to take, nor how long it's going to take to get to a certain world, especially if you're going uncharted. And of course, there's the loop of going out and doing these adventures and then going back to your hub area, which is Karum Station. Karum Station has its own little sections, NPCs, and ways to do downtime activities. Now, both the travel time has its own risks, as well as the expedition itself, and there is a time counter when it comes to the actions you take. All of this has its own brand of resource management, as well as several random event charts. Far too many to get into in one review. As a result of this, there's a lot of support for solo play for both these events, as well as a soft AI for combat encounters. A lot of the NPCs and monsters that you can encounter have a D6 list of actions that you can do randomly, so you can play the game solo. All in all, as with combat, it's a very modular experience. I know I use that word a lot with this kind of game, but it is applicable. Now, I know some would get into whether or not Across the Thousand Dead Worlds is an OSR compatible experience or not, but I have little interest in that kind of discussion. Personally, I think it's a pretty straightforward affair that could be run in a more pick-up manner than some games. And in some ways, it's kind of built for that. Additionally, I do think the people who prefer West Marches style campaigns, or Keep on the Borderlands, or just hex crawls in general, will find a lot to enjoy here. There's not a whole lot of things I could really nitpick aside from some organization things, which are really small potatoes. Maybe some of the charts could be in their own appendix, but that's about it. That said, it's clearly built for exploring planets as opposed to things like derelict ships or the like, though there's nothing stopping you from repurposing that. And ship combat is very much not a priority in this system, so keep that in mind. Still, that's not enough to knock it down a peg, so I'd give it a stamp of strongly recommended. There's a lot of bang for one's buck, especially for something that only costs about 20 euros on the PDF side. And if you want to go for a medium prep affair, you can certainly do a hell of a lot worse. So, yes, all in all, this is another certified banger from Black Oath Entertainment. Stay frosty.